Welcome to the Confessional Close-Up. My name is Christine Cisneros, and I'm so pleased that you are joining me here. The name of today's piece is called Sonar. I wanted to talk today about a series of issues that I think have culminated into some thoughts, kind of interlaced, and interestingly enough, seem to be complementary to each other in that way of augmenting what the topics that I wanted to talk originally about are and how they work together. And while it has occurred to me that there are so many reference points that we depend upon for our ways of moving around in the world, for our ways of understanding where we are in relationship to perhaps some things that were undeveloped before or underdeveloped, now becoming very obvious when we go to lean on them, skills that are calling to be refined, and also the sentiment of loss through understanding which reference points that we used to look at and base our movements off of, and our understanding of who we were, where we were, and perhaps where we're going. Waking up one day and finding that they are gone. I absolutely adored Laura's latest report on Into the Mystic, and that was, I think, this past Saturday, or might have been Friday, but it's a special report. It's about 42 minutes long, and it is well worth every second of listening to it, because some of the things that she talks about are the feeling right now, the energetics of being a widow at a grave. And I find that that is something that really fit into my life in the past couple of weeks. As most of you know, I live in Seattle, Washington, and watching some of the most horrific things happen here in terms of destruction, violence, taxation for things that are just straight up evil, and also watching the reference points that used to be here, the things that we all perhaps took for granted to various degrees that helped us to weather some of the not so pleasant aspects of where we live and perhaps what it was starting to become. I say this about Seattle, but really this is something that is indicative of any city that is densely populated and has become what I seem to think of, and others have chimed in about, as experiments and bluntly, psyops on the American public. In the throes of this re-election and all of the legalities and the sting operation that it is, and all of the ways in which the media are violent waves in this ocean of deception, all of us have had to brace ourselves for the pitching and the throwing that is happening at this point. It is very difficult to understand where you are in this ocean of deception. And it is much like being in an avalanche, wherein you can't tell which is up, which is down, and how deeply you are embedded in all of the snow and the rhetoric. Indeed, survival will depend on a few things, one of them being establishing which way really is up and which way is down, which is north, which is south. And in this spiritual, political, and even physical storm, we must know which way is heaven and which way is hell. In my travels of different parts of the world, one of the things I've always marveled at is that there are pieces of infrastructure, architecture, and even natural landscapes that have been there forever. And when people talk about them, there are so many stories that surround those reference points of history and human design. Some people that I've spoken with in these countries have comments and stories that range from having their first kiss at a statue to taking their children to different wonders that are in their country or in their city, to watching everything around those iconic and culturally deeply embedded places and their effect on shaping the continuity of the genealogies, the DNA, and the cultural reference points that everyone can touch upon, whether it is to gauge where one is, remember where one was, or fashion a way to understand where one could be. The more I thought about it in the days that have passed, there are so many things that are reference points for us. There are our parents, our lineages, There are moments in childhood that surface, memories that come up from time to time as we get older. It seems like they visit without much announcement. And there are also people that we meet and conversations that we have. I've noticed that there are reference points that we lean upon sometimes that could possibly be a way for us to avoid the next steps because of the comfort afforded by these. Now, I am definitely not against having comfort at all, of course. However, if the call to improve development and skill level in ourselves is in fact impeded, possibly, by a retreat into a reference point for an undue period of time or attention, then we must examine what it is that's calling to us to become the people we are here to become and expand in the ways that are to calibrate with the will of God. We know that our experience on this plane as DNA people in this packaging, the optimal experience of our lives truly depends on the largest and most pervasive reference point that we must calibrate our compasses to in order to understand where we are ultimately, and that is God. What makes our relationship with our Heavenly Father very different than any other reference point that we could have is that that reference point is not temporary, imperfect, and we can never plumb the depths completely or be too dependent on God. And I think part of the reason for that is because our dependence on our Heavenly Father requires action on our part. It requires us to take what it is that we are living in, producing, thinking, and living like, looking at it deeply, and overlaying the template of that which is God's good pleasure to give us as the kingdom. The reference points turned representations, turned reality, are the interconnection between what we notice, what we have as a model, and then become models of, and thus producing a life that is based off of and inside of the most secure and truthful course that we can have at hand to use our precious efforts and time here on the planet to develop our sonar with the most trustworthy pings that we encounter as we fulfill our purpose and enjoy the fruits of our labor earned through knowing exactly how we got there, reveling as deeply as we can in the beautiful design that we were created out of. As we are afforded this divine map, we know that we will experience the seeming losses of the reference points around us, landscapes that change with development and concrete. I know for a fact there are places that I could sit for a couple of hours and do some writing and kind of hide away from the population for a while and all of the frenetic energy. And most of those places are now gone where I live. The buildings that are destroyed and taken out, the buildings that held such memories for us in school, perhaps restaurants and churches and places that we would congregate, being torn out and made way for condominiums and well-surveilled parking lots. And of course, the loss of reference points in losing people. And this has many forms. People move away, people die. We have parts of our family that become estranged through politics, through religion, and through death. As everything shifts and the seasons come and go with their own pruning and flourishing, we are in God's keeping perpetually. And this does not exclude that our becoming the best captains of our own vessels through waters that are calm and, as they are now, very, very stormy and turbulent. Not because we want to prove that we deserve God's love, but because we know the value of God's love as we have it right now in this moment. It is always prudent, as you hear many times, to prepare for times that are difficult. And yet what we know is that the real reason for this is to prepare us to carry ourselves through those times. Recovery, survival, maintenance, flourishing. This is all so that we may enjoy what God talks about in giving us the kingdom and it being his good pleasure to do so. In this way, we might have the kingdom along the way. We may experience that reference point as it glimmers, as it shimmers in the distance, and as we hold it in our hearts tightly while we sail towards that which we know is worth it. It can be very disconcerting to hear a sonar ping that is very close to you if you do not believe that you have the complete armor of God, if you do not believe that you are loved completely from head to toe and in your soul, if you think you are sailing completely alone. But as the light gets brighter, and as the revelations come, and as the disclosure happens, we know for a fact who it is that is our guard, our God, and our Father. And in simply knowing this, in simply understanding and remembering to refer to this reference point of knowledge, and in the simple knowing of this, in the being still and knowing that he is God, we find the way through, albeit narrow, to be protected from the vast evil that is around us, and to deliver us not to a paradise that we don't understand, as so many do not understand how they win the lottery, but in the divinely inspired path that we have come to know and follow and trust as the co-creation of our destiny in our becoming aware of our own DNA and our spiritual birthright that we were afforded. Keep all of your lights on, Patriot, even in the fear of being targeted, because what you will find are those who do not believe our destiny to be slavery and death at the hands of tyrannical and Leviathan global elites. We will become first a harbor full of lanterns, a bay full of signals and sonar pings to each other of love and light, and then a vast ocean inspired and illuminated as we make our way back home to God.